The Arcadia slid into the atmosphere of teeth like a blade through silk. For a brief moment, there was silence, then a hum filled the control room, the sound of countless systems awakening, responding to the gravitational pull. Ariana Chase stood at the front of the command deck, gazing at the planet below. Blue skies stretched out over an endless ocean of emerald green, the kind of landscape Earth had lost long ago. "It's beautiful," Lieutenant Derek Holt whispered beside her. Ariana gave him a sideways smile. "It's our second chance, Holt. A fresh start for humanity. Can't get more beautiful than that." The Arcadia, a colossal vessel, the last hope of Earth, was the culmination of decades of scientific endeavor, a technological marvel that had carried its passengers across the stars. They were the lucky few, the chosen ones. The best and brightest of Earth, destined to be the pioneers of a new home on a planet that had everything humanity needed. Natural resources, a breathable atmosphere, fertile land. All the things Earth had long since exhausted. "How long until we land?" Holt asked. Ariana glanced at the time estimates flickering on her screen. "About 30 minutes. Let's make sure everything's in order. We want this to go smoothly." "Of course, Captain." Holt gave a salute and hurried off, heading for the lower levels. Ariana stared out the massive window, her fingers drumming lightly on the console. T had been identified as a planet capable of sustaining human life, but there was something else that called to her. T wasn't just a new beginning. It was an escape. A chance to leave behind Earth's polluted atmosphere, its endless wars over dwindling resources, and its crushing overpopulation. Here, on T, they could have it all: peace, abundance, a future. But as much as she wanted to believe in the fairy tale, she knew things couldn't be that easy. "Captain, the landing is smooth," Lieutenant Holt called out as the ship's hull vibrated slightly. "Approaching designated drop zone." Ariana nodded, her pulse quickening. She watched as the lush planet loomed larger in the viewports. They were about to make history. "Prepare for first contact protocols. Once we've landed, deploy the exploration team. Let's make sure everything is secure." The ship's thrusters fired, slowing their descent. Suddenly, there was a sharp lurch, followed by a massive jolt. The console in front of Ariana flashed red. The hum of the engine stopped. "Status report." Ariana snapped, spinning around in her seat. "We've lost power, Captain." "The main engines are down," Holt reported, his voice tight with urgency. "Something's not right." Ariana's stomach dropped. The ship began to tilt, then rock violently. Panic spread across the bridge as the crew scrambled for control. Sparks flew from the walls, lighting up the otherwise dim command center. Ariana slammed her hand on the emergency beacon, calling out to the rest of the ship. "Brace for impact. All hands, brace for impact." There was a blinding flash, then darkness. Hours later, Ariana awoke with a groan. Her head throbbed, and the taste of metal lingered on her tongue. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinking against the dim light that filtered through the wreckage. The Arcadia was no longer in the sky, no longer soaring toward its promised land. Instead, it lay in pieces, its massive hull embedded deep in the dense forest of T, the twisted remains of the ship spilling across the landscape like a giant carcass. Ariana pushed herself upright, pain shooting through her limbs. She was covered in dust and debris, but miraculously, she seemed to be in one piece. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she realized she wasn't alone. The crew was scattered across the ruined bridge, some unconscious, others frantically trying to assess the damage. "Captain, you're awake." Lieutenant Holt's voice cut through the haze. He crouched beside her, offering her a hand. "Report," she ordered, taking his hand and pulling herself to her feet. "We've crashed, ma'am. The ship's totaled. Power's down. Communications are gone. I've got no idea what happened." Holt's face was pale, his voice strained. Ariana surveyed the scene. It was a disaster. Cables and panels had been torn apart, fires smoldered in the corners, and the crew looked shaken. "Get the exploration team ready," she said. "We have to get out there and assess our surroundings. We need to figure out what went wrong and what's out there. We can't stay in here." Holt nodded and moved to rally the crew. Ariana took a deep breath, trying to steady her mind. The situation was far worse than she'd anticipated. It wasn't just the crash. There was something else. Something about Teeth that they hadn't prepared for. She stepped to the cracked viewport and looked out, but instead of the serene landscape she had expected, there was only an overwhelming expanse of towering trees, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes. The sky was darker here than she had seen on the sensors, as if a storm were brewing. "We're not alone," she muttered under her breath. The first steps outside the ship were met with a strange silence. No birds, no rustling winds, no sounds of animals. The jungle around them seemed to breathe, but it wasn't alive in a natural way. The ground was soft, almost spongy beneath her boots, and the trees towered over them like sentinels, their bark an iridescent shade of blue. It was beautiful, in a way. But it was also unsettling. "Captain," Holt called out, kneeling next to a strange plant, its petals glowing faintly. "Look at this. It's not like anything we've seen on Earth. There's no reference for it in any of our databases." Ariana knelt beside him, touching the plant gently. It was soft, but there was an underlying current of energy in the air, a hum that made her skin crawl. She stood up quickly, scanning their surroundings. "Stay alert," she ordered. "This planet isn't what it seems." The rest of the crew spread out, beginning to catalog the environment. Dr. Genevieve Coombs, the biologist, was already crouched down beside another cluster of plants, muttering to herself as she carefully examined them. "We need to get some samples back to the ship," she said absently, clearly more focused on the plants than the danger they might be in. Ariana's gut twisted. Everything about this planet felt off. They weren't alone. She could feel eyes watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, the trees shook. Ariana whipped her head around, instinctively reaching for her sidearm, though she knew it wouldn't be much protection if something was out there. Then, a figure appeared. It was tall, at least 7 feet, its body a shifting, translucent mass, glowing faintly in the gloom. It had no face, no real features, just a shape that seemed to move with a strange fluidity. Ariana's heart skipped a beat. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling. She raised her weapon, though she knew it was pointless. The figure tilted its head, a soft, melodic hum vibrating through the air. "I am Savi," it said. Its voice was neither male nor female, but a mixture of both, carried on a wave of pure thought. Ariana's mind whirled. The Savi. The name had come up in some of the early data they'd received, but there had been no confirmation. No real proof. Just rumors, whispers from scientists who believed Teeth was not as uninhabited as advertised. "We are the guardians of this world," the Savi continued, its form shifting slightly. "And you are the invaders." The air seemed to ripple as the Savi's form shimmered before Ariana. It wasn't just the strange, almost liquid quality of the being's body that made her uneasy, it was the way the world around her seemed to grow still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. No sound, no movement, save for the low hum that radiated from the Savi like an electric current. The crew stood frozen, their hands hovering near their weapons, unsure whether to fight or flee. But Ariana's mind raced faster than her instincts could catch up. The Savi, their very presence was proof that T had never truly been a blank slate. It wasn't just a haven waiting for humanity. It was already someone else's home. "You are, guardians?" Ariana's voice was shaky, but she pushed through it. She couldn't let fear show. Not now. Not in front of her crew. The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, the air around it seemed to grow denser, heavier, as though the Savi were trying to communicate on a level beyond simple speech. She could feel a pulse in her chest, a low, thudding rhythm that matched the strange energy emanating from the figure. And then, without warning, a flood of images and emotions rushed into her mind. Violent, chaotic bursts of thought terrifying and vast. Destruction. Desolation. The earth she had left behind, now a dying, hollow shell. The Savi's consciousness pressed against her own, overwhelming her senses. Stop it. Ariana clenched her fists, forcing the foreign presence out of her mind. But the Savi didn't relent. Instead, it shared something deeper, an image of itself, no longer a shifting form, but solid and whole, standing at the heart of T's verdant wilderness. We are not invaders, the voice whispered into her mind. We are T. You are the invaders. Ariana staggered back, shaking her head, trying to clear her thoughts. Her breath came fast, her heart pounding in her ears. She could still feel the Savi's presence within her, and the more she fought it, the more the world around her seemed to grow dimmer, darker. Captain? Holt called, his voice filled with concern. Are you all right? Ariana blinked, her vision clearing as the strange sensation lifted. The Savi stood silent, waiting, its glowing form steady in the shadows. Its telepathic assault had ended, but the tension in the air remained. Ariana cleared her throat, finding her voice. We're not here to invade. We just need. You need? The Savi's voice cut her off, sharp and cold. It sounded almost amused. You need? The words echoed in her mind, stretching and warping into a sound that almost seemed to laugh. You've come to steal from us. To take from this world what you couldn't protect on your own. Your kind ravaged its home, and now you seek to destroy another. Ariana's chest tightened. This was no negotiation. This wasn't even an invitation to talk. This was a warning. She forced herself to stand tall, trying to find her words through the rush of panic rising in her throat. We're not here to destroy anything. The Savi raised a hand, and the air itself seemed to warp around the gesture. No more lies, it intoned. You may call it what you will, but your kind is always the same. You come to possess. Your species has no respect for balance, no understanding of coexistence. Ariana felt the pressure in her chest grow, as if her lungs were being compressed by invisible hands. She gasped for breath, struggling against the sudden weight of the Savi's presence. Stop it. Holt shouted, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his weapon. We're not your enemies. The Savi's form flickered, and in that instant, it was no longer a single entity standing before them. Instead, it split into several forms, shadowy, indistinct shapes moving in unison. Each of them radiated an eerie energy, swirling and pulsating with life, but also with a palpable threat. The truth of your kind is in your nature. You take. You consume. You destroy. The figures converged on Ariana and Holt, each movement in sync. Ariana could feel the temperature of the air drop, a chill creeping into her bones. Her mouth went dry, and her legs began to shake. Captain! Holt yelled, his voice high with fear. We need to, but the Savi interrupted again, its voice weaving through the air like a song. You are nothing but parasites, crawling to another world. And you will not be allowed to consume us as you did to your own. Ariana couldn't move. Every part of her wanted to flee, wanted to run back to the ship, but the Savi's presence held her in place. It wasn't just its words. It was something deeper, something primal and unsettling that rooted her to the earth beneath her feet. You will not take. The words resonated in her chest, shaking her very core. She felt the weight of them, and in that moment, she understood. The Savi weren't just protectors of T, they were the planet itself. The balance of life here wasn't something they merely defended, it was their existence. Every tree, every gust of wind, every creature was a part of them, and the human race, in all its desperation, was a threat to that balance. She fought to breathe, to find the strength to speak again, but the air was thick with pressure, and her body felt too heavy. Then, suddenly, the weight lifted. The figures scattered, retreating into the shadows of the trees. Ariana collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a long moment, she couldn't move. She heard Holt's voice, faint and distant. "Captain, are you?" She looked up, finally able to clear the fog in her mind. The Sci-Fi were gone. The strange presence had vanished as quickly as it had come. But the jungle around them felt different. Alive in a way that made Ariana's skin crawl. Holt knelt beside her, looking torn between concern and confusion. What the hell just happened? Was that telepathy? A mind attack? Ariana wiped her forehead, trying to regain her composure. That was the Sci-Fi. They're not what we thought. Dr. Coombs, who had been observing quietly from behind them, now stepped forward. So they can communicate like that, directly into your mind? Incredible. But, she paused, glancing nervously at the trees, it seems like they've made their feelings pretty clear. Yeah, no kidding, Ariana muttered, rising to her feet. They think we're invaders, and they're not interested in negotiating. Holt frowned. I don't get it. Why would they attack us like that? We didn't even have time to talk. Ariana shook her head. They're not just defending the planet. They are the planet. Everything here is interconnected. I don't think they see us as visitors. They see us as a threat to their survival. The crew stood in tense silence. The gravity of what had just happened settled in. They were standing on a world that didn't belong to them. And the Sci-Fi, the native species, had made it clear that they would protect their home by any means necessary. Get back to the ship, Ariana ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. We need to regroup. We can't make any decisions until we understand what we're up against. As they made their way back to the wreckage of the Arcadia, the weight of their situation pressed down on Ariana with each step. They were stranded, isolated, and the planet they had come to conquer now seemed less like a savior and more like a hostile force, and the Sci-Fi, they weren't just guardians. They were something else, something beyond human understanding. The truth, Ariana realized, was far more complicated than they could have ever imagined. The hardest part wasn't just surviving on T. It was what they would have to sacrifice to do so. The journey back to the wreckage was slow, the atmosphere thick with tension. Every step through the strange, otherworldly jungle felt heavier than the last. Ariana could feel the eyes of the Sci-Fi still upon her, the weight of their warning pressing into her thoughts, as though their unseen presence lingered in the shadows. Watching, the crew moved quietly, each person lost in their own thoughts, the silence between them thick with the unspoken realization that their situation was far worse than they'd feared. They weren't just stranded. They weren't just facing an unknown world. They were on a planet that was alive, a place where every breath, every footstep, every movement had consequences, and their arrival uninvited and desperate was nothing short of an offense. Ariana's mind raced. She could feel the pull of responsibility, of duty. She had to lead them, had to keep them calm. But inside, a gnawing sense of doubt had taken root. She had promised them a new beginning. She had promised them hope. Now, she wasn't sure what she had promised them at all. As they reached the wreckage of the Arcadia, Ariana halted, surveying the damage. The once proud ship now lay in ruins, a skeletal frame of metal and broken glass, half buried beneath the thick foliage. The hissing sounds of fire and the crackle of twisted metal filled the air, though most of the ship had already begun to cool. It was clear they wouldn't be flying anywhere soon. The crew gathered around, and Ariana did her best to meet their eyes, even though she knew the look in her own had betrayed her. They needed answers. She needed answers. Dr. Coombs was the first to speak. The Sci-Fi, they're not just protecting the planet. They are the planet, aren't they? What does that mean for us? Ariana's gaze flicked to the ruins of the ship, then back to the biologist. I think it means that T is an organism in its own right, connected, interconnected. Every living thing here is part of a greater whole. The Sci-Fi might not just be a species, they might be an extension of the planet itself. That's why they reacted the way they did. An extension of the planet, Holt muttered, shaking his head. Like, a collective consciousness? What, are we talking about some kind of sentient ecosystem? It's possible, Ariana said. If the Savi are so deeply embedded in the world's fabric, their defense of it would be a natural reaction, not just to the arrival of humans, but to any disturbance. To anything that threatens the balance. And we're that disturbance? Holt asked, his voice low. Yes, Ariana replied, and the word felt like a stone in her chest. Whether we like it or not, we're a threat. And we need to figure out how to fix that, or else we're not going to survive here. A sudden crack of a branch made them all jump, and for a brief moment, everyone's hand hovered near their weapons. But the sound wasn't followed by movement, and soon the jungle fell silent again. Whatever had made the noise was long gone. Do you think they'll attack again? Lieutenant Holt asked, eyes darting around. Ariana hesitated. They might. If they think we're still a threat. But we don't know enough. We don't know how far their influence stretches or what they'll do if we push too hard. Then what are we supposed to do? Coombs pressed, her voice rising with frustration. Sit here and wait for them to destroy us? We can't just hide. We're not hiding, Ariana said, forcing her voice to sound stronger than she felt. We're going to try to understand them. We need to find out what they want, and if there's any way to coexist with them. Holt frowned. Coexist? Captain, you saw the way they reacted. I don't think they're interested in coexistence. They see us as nothing more than invaders. I don't think talking is going to help. We'll see, Ariana said, though even she wasn't sure of her own words. Right now, our priority is survival. We need food, shelter, and communication with Earth. If the Savi are as integrated with the planet as we think, then maybe they're the key to getting what we need. But we're not going to find that out by running. She turned to the wreckage. We need to salvage whatever we can from the ship, assess our supplies, and figure out a plan. We're staying here for now. If we want a future on this planet, we'll have to earn it. The next few days were a blur of survival, tension, and uncertainty. The crew worked tirelessly to gather what little they could from the wreckage of the Arcadia. They had to get the communication system up and running, though they weren't sure if it was even possible, given the extensive damage, and begin rationing their supplies. But every move they made was shadowed by the growing feeling that the planet itself was watching them, that T was a place where nothing went unnoticed. The Savi, of course, were nowhere to be seen. But their presence hung like a storm on the horizon. Every night, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the trees, waiting. It wasn't until the fifth day, after the crew had begun to settle into a makeshift camp near the wreck, that they encountered the Savi again. It was the same as before, no warning, no words. The air around them thickened, grew heavier, as if the atmosphere itself were charging with energy. The trees trembled, their leaves rustling in the absence of wind. And then, without any sign of movement, the Savi appeared. Only this time, there were more of them. 4 figures, tall and translucent, glowing faintly in the murk of the jungle. Ariana froze, her body instinctively shifting into a defensive posture. But she couldn't bring herself to raise her weapon this time. Something about the Savi's presence made it impossible to think of them as mere enemies. The lead figure stepped forward, its form shifting and twisting in the same fluid manner. Its voice once again, not a voice, but a thought in her mind echoed, "You still seek to possess what is not yours." Ariana swallowed. "We don't want to possess anything. We just want to survive." The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then, it spoke again, its voice laced with an unspoken sorrow. "Survival is not enough. To survive is to live. To live is to respect. To respect is to understand. Your kind does not understand. You take. You destroy." Ariana felt the weight of those words, and she had no answer for them. How could she? How could she defend humanity's history of greed and exploitation when the truth was standing right before her? but something in her resisted, something deep inside refused to accept that there was no way forward. "We can change," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "We can learn to live in harmony with your world. We've made mistakes, but we want to fix them. We're not like the people you fear." The Savi's figure shimmered, and for a moment, Ariana thought she saw something in its movement, a flicker of emotion, something almost like a sigh. "We will watch you," the Savi said. "You may not understand now, but you will. T will teach you what your kind has forgotten." With that, the figures slowly faded into the dense undergrowth, disappearing as quickly as they had come. The tension in the air remained, but the immediate danger had passed. Ariana exhaled, feeling as if she had been holding her breath for hours. The encounter had left her shaken, but also, something else. A glimmer of hope. "They're not giving up on us," Holt said, breaking the silence. "They're giving us a chance." Ariana looked around at the crew, each of them watching her with a mix of uncertainty and reluctant optimism. The path forward was unclear, but one thing had changed in that brief moment. The Savi hadn't come to destroy them, not yet. They were giving humanity a chance to understand, and maybe, just maybe, that was all they needed. The end.